Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords. And there's Meatball. So, today I'm going to talk to you about something that has come up that I had not been aware of until now. But I mean, it's very recently happened, anyways. So, Kobold Press is an OSR publisher company that make a variety of products. And they recently completely caved to a censorship demand that was brought about by a person who is pretty clearly a malignant narcissist, a psychopathic, Marxism spouting degenerate who was only interested in achieving further censorship and therefore self-glorification. So this is a very disturbing thing to see happening, especially in this day and age when there are more people realizing, apparently Kobold Press does not, that a complaint from one lunatic on Twitter doesn't mean you have to suddenly start banning books, right? But there we are. So I'll tell you the story about this, and especially why it particularly pisses me off, because there are elements of it that bother me on both sides, but obviously especially on one. So Kobold Press did a book, and has had a book for quite some time, called The Kobold Guide to Game Design. I don't remember when the original edition of it came out. It's one of these typical, how to make, your RPG books or settings or adventures or campaign or stuff like that. That is undoubtedly filled with pretty shallow advice about what to do. You probably get better design advice from this channel than you would from that book. But it's got all the typical stuff. It features a team of design all-stars led by Wolfgang Bauer. Wolfgang Bauer is a guy who's had a long history in D&D stuff, all the way from, I think, like 2nd edition to 5th edition. So it's, he's a very well noted person, what happened is they recently did a re-release of that product, right? The Kobold Guide to Game Design. And I guess someone noticed that there was a certain essay there dating back to, I think it was 2010, that was called, there's a typical example of what you probably find in the book. It's called What Makes a Knight Arabian? And it was essentially talking about having adventures in settings that are not your standard kind of medieval Renaissance fair European fantasy, right? And so he was, Wolfgang Bauer wrote this essay, and he was suggesting that, when you're usually, he says, well, I'm going to quote him here. He says, Arabia is the D&D world's version of spring break. You go there for a change of scenery, right? And, he also says, for this game, you don't want to or need to understand the difference between Shiite and Sunni, or the difference between Persian folklore and Arabian folklore. You just need to know whether fire mages are on your side or not, and some rules of behavior, like the bond of salt, the time of prayer, or the correct way to speed a camel through the desert. And that was apparently the offending paragraph for the people that decided that this had to be banned. Now, let me point something out. I mean, this essay is not that great, because Wolfgang is essentially saying you should care very, very little about the authenticity of the setting. And I mean, that makes sense, because if I'm not mistaken, I think Wolfgang Bauer was a contributor to Al-Qadim, which was the 2nd edition book that largely didn't give a damn about authenticity. I mean, didn't give a damn at the level of, say, Oriental Adventures in the 1st edition, where, you know, the inspirations were all just kind of directly from kung fu movies or movies about samurais, but rather, what the hell are you doing up there? What are you doing? Oh, never mind. She stopped doing it. Of course, she stopped doing it the moment I checked on her. But you know, still, Al-Qadim was very, very far from a proper, authentic setting book. It was actually really advanced for its time in a way, because it was the first product that was something other than just stereotypes. But it was still a book where very clearly that ethos stood, right? It was more the slightly better informed Prince of Persia sort of campaign, rather than something that was based much more on the actual details of the culture and history of the region. And it, you know, very clearly was saying, well, you know, you don't need to care about any of this stuff. And here's the thing, right? You don't actually need to care about the difference between Shiite and Sunni for the most part. I mean, like, I think the point of what Bauer's essay was to say that you don't want to drown any setting in culture wank or local lore in such a way that it makes it unplayable. That anytime you have a choice, and this is the ethos that I have. Now, my products are super authentic in terms of the historical research, right? So whether it's Arrows of Indra, which is India, Sword and Caravan here, which is the Middle East and the Silk Road, or Lion and Dragon, which is Europe, because and this is the part that is very crucial to this whole argument of mine, is that normal European so-called European fantasy settings in D&D and other RPGs are just as much, if not worse, bullshit than any of the non-European settings people have tried to do, right? They are not authentic. And I try for all of mine to be super authentic, but whenever it is the key thing that is going to win any challenge there between playability and authenticity is playability, right? I always make sure for the edge to be on the side of playability, because this is a role-playing game. It's not an essay. It's not an indoctrination session. It's not anything else, right? It's not a university seminar. It's an RPG. Now, the thing is, good lore makes a setting more playable. It fills it with lots of action and excitement and adventure, right? Of course, certainly, it might be important to know the difference between Shiite and Sunni Islam if you're doing an adventure where there's a conflict between Shiites and Sunnis, right? For example. But yeah, I think Bauer's, not reading it, only having been able to see the selection of it that has been cited, and in fact now it's impossible to read. Nobody will ever be able to read it. This essay of his from 2010 was probably saying that. It was probably saying basically that it's more important that you focus with the playability of the world than going into long and intricate detail about specific elements of culture that won't likely affect the characters that are living in that setting or traveling through that setting in either case, right? So it's not. This is nothing worth censoring, right? Even if it is a little stupid, because I don't agree that a non-European setting should be Spring Break. I've had many campaigns that were run in non-European settings. It's something that should be. The problem is the argument that he makes is fundamentally flawed, because he's pretending as though the Forgotten Realms is really sophisticated reproduction of European culture, which it isn't, right? So, everything is medieval happy fun time land. It's just different areas of medieval worlds. But my argument is actually just the opposite. Is that if you actually don't make it just based on stupid stereotypes, then you're going to have a much better time with everything, including European fantasy. So anyways, some malignant narcissist named Jared Rasher decided to write a blog entry based on bitching on Twitter, no doubt, about how this essay that was originally from 12 years ago and was just reprinted in a book that almost no one is buying. I mean, it isn't like the Kobold Guide to Game Design is the hot item in the OSR or something like that, right? It's a reprint of a book that's been around for 12 years. But this person decided that this was, an atrocity, a crime against humanity, that Wolfgang Bauer would probably need to be disemboweled, and that the entire company should be burned to the ground. And Kobold responded in a panic, saying that, they have immediately eliminated that essay from the digital version, and therefore all future print-on-demand versions of that book, that it will never be seen again. Wolfgang Bauer apologized profusely for his National Socialist past, or whatever the hell it is that he's supposedly accused of, and they basically not just bent the knee, but put their faces so up this guy's ass that that I don't know how they're breathing at this point. It's pretty goddamn ridiculous, It gets even more ridiculous when you look at, I've looked at the essay that this guy wrote condemning it, and even there he gives away the game of why this even matters. It's not that this was like, again, not the hot item. It has nothing to do with that. It's because Kobold relatively recently had stated in one of their Kickstarters that whereas 5th edition, 1 D&D, is going to get rid of races and skills and proficiencies and all that based on race, Kobold Press had come out and said, well, you know what? We are keeping in our Tome of Heroes hardcover and plan to keep in Wastes of Chaos, I guess that's their new Kickstarter, the racial bonuses. It's easy to make that optional if you prefer the new style. And yes, Wastes of Chaos will have ages, sizes, and other details, right? Because all those things were taken out of 1 D&D because it's problematic, right? Because it's somehow prejudicial if we say halflings are shorter than humans, or if we say, that a certain race would have a +1 to strength and another one would have a -1 to strength, right? Even though we're talking about alien races here, we're not talking about human distinctions, right? So that's the real reason that they decide that this, these typical, and I know these people, I know these type, I don't know this guy specifically, but I have known the type of people who will every single day search through everything I've written and at some stage have read through everything I've ever written, every book, every tweet, every post on Google+, every blog entry, everything, every post on the RPG site, everything they can find in trying to find stuff to attack me with, right? And it's not, and often what they'll do is try to selectively quote and then put in stuff at moments where they feel like it's, these are people who are doing a level of research that, if they were working for the NSA, they would they would be richly rewarded for their incredible abilities, but instead they're wasting their lives, in an adult diaper in some basement, spending 17 hours a day researching me to, be able to have evidence against me, right? And that's what these assholes do, right? And this guy, Jared, he got angry, so mad that Kobold Press is not following the new dictates of the regime of saying that you can't actually have any race distinctions in RPGs. And so he decided to look through everything Kobold Press ever did until he found this essay by Wolfgang Bauer, which is, I guess, the worst thing he could find about them. And he attacked them. But who's really stupid is Kobold Press for giving a shit, for giving a two-penny fuck what this guy thinks. And the problem is that the reason it really gets my goat is because it just happened to be a statement regarding a non-Western setting. And of course, the argument that this asshole makes and that other people have made against Wolfgang Bauer is not that Wolfgang Bauer was a bit flippant about the importance of authenticity in presenting a culture inspired by a real world culture in an RPG. No, it's not that. Their attack is that it is extremely, and I'm going to quote here, right? The statement in the above cited essay, this is the Narcissist speaking, right? The statement in the above cited essay is bad and harmful for a white designer to espouse, unexamined when creating content. All right, so this is back again to the argument, of Hans Meyer Fritz Angelou, right? that it's the magic blood that lets you create a non-Western setting and makes it good, right? And that anybody who does otherwise is doing evil somehow. It's not saying Wolfgang Bauer was a bit boneheaded in how he described the challenge of authenticity versus playability. No, it's saying Wolfgang Bauer's an evil white man, and how dare he do an Arabian setting? Because he doesn't have the right blood. He is not pure. Ein Volk, ein Game. These guys are the biggest effing Nazis that you can imagine, right? They're the ones that believe in absolute racial purity being a qualification for your ability to do something, to talk about a culture or about history or about a game, It's insanity what they're advocating for. And this is and by bending the knee to them, Kobold Press is encouraging that insanity. Let me be really clear, right? Arabian, Al-Qadim, Arabian Adventures is not a fantastic setting. It was, like I said, better than Oriental Adventures, which they've also attacked, right? But it's also no worse than anything that most people have come up with, right? There's very few really authentic takes on historical RPGs, and most of them have nothing to do with the race of the person making them, right? The most authentic book on India in the entire history of RPG publishing is Arrows of Indra. The most authentic book on the Silk Road region ever published in RPGs is Sword and Caravan. The most authentic book about Europe ever published in RPG history is Lion and Dragon, about medieval Europe. So this is, and it's not because I'm so great. It's just that nobody else does it, right? I'm a little bit great in the sense that I have, a history degree and whatnot. So it makes it better for me, easier for me to do the research that's necessary. And I'm a pretty good game designer, so I make it playable. I make it fun to play it, right? There are a few other games that have historical accuracy. For example, the French game Qin, which is based in the Warring States period of China, is a pretty well accurate depiction of what China was like during that Warring States period just before the first emperor. Really good. And the Spanish game Aquelarre is also a pretty good depiction of medieval Spain. I would say very much a kind of an equal to Lion and Dragon, right? And there are others too, right? A lot of them, for some reason, still Western but non-English originally, right? The point, though, is that it has nothing to do with a person's race, whether they're qualified. Wolfgang Bauer is not disqualified from doing an Arabian setting because he's not Arabian. That's got nothing to do with it. There is no and being an Arabian person from the 21st century gives you no qualification whatsoever for writing an accurate book about, let's say, 11th century Arabia, any more so than being an American from, Duluth or something in the 21st century, a white, let's say, European descended American from Duluth in the 21st century would give you any qualification to be able to write an accurate depiction of the 10th century Holy Roman Empire, right? It wouldn't. This is a delusional fantasy that these psychopaths who are fundamentally racist psychopaths have. And here we go. Kobold Press has bent the knee to them, to that stupidity, right? To that way of thinking. Again, the fact is that there's, yes, Al-Qadim is stereotypical, but so is every single setting that TSR ever put out that is supposedly Western fantasy. Forgotten Realms, Greyhawk, all of it is based on movies and comic books and science fiction, not on authentic history. So like, what are you worried about? Like, how is Al-Qadim any more stereotypical? In fact, it is less stereotypical than, say, Greyhawk was in the second edition period. Greyhawk is much more of a stereotype of Europe, of a shallow and inaccurate version of Europe than Al-Qadim was a shallow and inaccurate version of the Middle East. Neither of them were particularly good, but they were both very bad. You're not comparing. What you're trying to do there is to claim that one needs to be more authentic than the other, and that's not true. I would say it's better when both are really authentic, right? Lion and Dragon is an exciting game because it lets you play with all the kind of folklore and magic and mysticism and religion and goriness and social construction of medieval Europe, right? Sword and Caravan is full of all the details of what the real places and cultures were like, again, and also the monsters and magic of legend of that area, of those regions were like in the 12th and 13th century in the Silk Road. And that's really cool, and it's exciting to play, as long as it's done in a way that's really playable, which mine are, right? But, to argue that somehow only non-Western settings need to be super accurate is stupid. And it's even more stupid when you then say, well, and to be accurate, it could only be done by a non-white person, right? Like that's where you go from stupid to dangerously insane, right? In any case, we know that they don't really mean it, because the Daniel Kwan situation proves that. They had, Daniel Kwan was the guy, a Canadian of Asian descent, who had complained about Oriental Adventures. He tried to have the original Oriental Adventures book banned, and Wizards didn't ban it. Instead, what they did is they put a warning label on it, claiming that Oriental Adventures is based on, stereotypes and is probably racist, and if you're probably a racist if you buy it. But they kept selling it because they wanted to keep making money, right? Which proves that they don't actually care at all about, them selling it with the warning means either Wizards are racists or Wizards don't believe that Oriental Adventures is actually racist. They're just doing this to placate a group of totalitarian maniacs while still making money, right? And then they gave Daniel Kwan a job. And here's the funny part, and I've told you guys this before if you watch some of my other videos. Daniel Kwan went on to make a setting in his adventure in Candlekeep Mysteries that is 100% stereotypical. It's exactly based on the same movies, the same kung fu film sort of tradition as Oriental Adventures was. It's no better. But the difference is his skin color is different, and therefore his thing is wonderful, while Oriental Adventures is written by a white man is not. That's all they end up caring about, right? He had no special authenticity to what he wrote. It was just him complaining because he wanted a job, and he thought that somebody else shouldn't have a job, right? and the rest of the crowd are either too stupid to know that this is no more authentic than Oriental Adventures, or they just don't care, because they're also only caring about being racists and saying that your race matters in terms of what settings you can write about, which is not true. What matters is how much have you researched it, which in Daniel Kwan's case is basically not very much at all, because he based it again probably on wuxia movies that he'd been watching, and that's it. he researched about as much of it as Gary Gygax did on Oriental Adventures, maybe even less, because Gygax at least used some of his nerdy obsessions with weapons and stuff to add some more details that were a bit beyond the standard kung fu movie fare. So that's it. That's the story. In any case, I would say Kobold Press at this point is very clearly decided that they're going to be full collaborators with these sort of totalitarian idiots, and shouldn't really be given a lot of quarter on account of this, any sympathy, I mean, because nowadays you don't have to do that, right? It was one thing 2 years ago when everybody was terrified except me, right? 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, when there was basically everyone but me was not standing up to them. They were all cowed and feared, scared of somebody, of some rando on Twitter calling them a racist, right? And so they would do anything that they were told to do by the terrorist mobs. But nowadays it is a bit different. They could have said no, and they chose not to. They chose instead to play the virtue signaling game. And that's why Kobold Press is canceled. I'm Matt Walsh. No, sorry. I'm the RPG Pundit. And I guess that's it for today. If you like this video, if you want to support games that are interesting and exciting, that present really accurate depictions of culture in a way that are really cool, then check out my products like Sword and Caravan, Lion and Dragon, Arrows of Indra, the Old School Companion, and all of my RPG Pundit Presents PDF series, right? Whether you're spending $2.99 on an RPG Pundit Presents issue, that there's 108 of them to choose from, or you spend, I think it's $40 for the hardcover version of Sword and Caravan. You can also get it in softcover for a bit less. Whatever you spend, you're giving me your support, you're helping me fight the good fight, but you're also getting something totally playable for your games and compatible. It's OSR, right? So you can use it with anything that's based on D&D, and you can mix and match and make it your own. And I'm very happy if you do, right? So if you can, support me by picking up my stuff. If you can't right now, then be sure you subscribe and like this video, or if you've already bought my stuff, subscribe, like this video, and share it. Most important of all, share the video. Share it anywhere you think someone will find it interesting, or anywhere you think it'll piss someone off. Thank you very much. Currently smoking Davidoff 400 Series Apple, plus Cornell and Deal's Old Joe Crayons.